I wish I had the secret sauce on that one because I think that's the answer. That's the secret everybody's looking for. Where it's worked out for me is the old saying that if you act as if you own the business, someday you will. And so when you see people in their individual contributor roles, owning their worlds, owning the results, and how they say things and how they show up, they do things that are not asked of them. One person in particular has continually taken on more responsibility before they were asked. Said, hey, I'm ready to take on this person. You mind if I take him on? They didn't say, hey, will you pay me more and I'll take on this person? And so so when you see that, to me, that's somebody you really want to hone in on and see about creating better opportunities for them in the future.
This is the Entrepreneurs United podcast with your hosts, John St. Pierre and Rich Hoffman.
Today we have the honor and privilege of sitting down with an old friend of ours, Caleb Brunz, who we met many years ago, maybe 25 plus years ago, back in College Pro Painters. And today, Caleb is a very successful business owner. One of the things I like most about him is he has head coach as his title on LinkedIn. He's the only person who I've ever seen who's had that. And welcome to the show, Caleb. I'd love to start off right off the bat on that head coach piece. Why do you have that as your moniker, that people see your first and last name and they see head coach? Why did you pick that? Why are you so passionate about that?
First off, thanks for having me on the show. I'm very honored. So and as John said earlier before we record, it's been 25 years. So it's great to see John again and to reconnect with you guys. Originally, when I started the business, I started it on what would give me joy in my life, regardless of getting paid. And one of the opportunities I had in previous career was coaching young people to be entrepreneurs. And so that's why I took that title, and I've always treated my job as the responsibility to really pass things on and to help influence people's performance.
Caleb, I got to dive right in right here. I love what you said. How can I get joy in life without getting paid? That's what I want to do. But why? What hit you in a specific moment? Because that's a pretty bold statement. What hit you in that moment, or what experiences did you have personally that led you to, I don't care what I do I don't even care if I get paid. I want to do something I enjoy doing. How did that come to be? There must have been some moment, some pain moment. There's something deep there that happened that led you to that conclusion. What was it?
Yeah, it was a transition from a 14-year career. It was 2009 or 2010. And I was pretty wrapped up in my previous career of 14 years and really went through a career identity crisis, would be the best way I could describe it, where I didn't really have a good sense of who I was outside of the role I played in that previous job. And so as I was doing some soul searching at the tender old age of 33, something like that, it just dawned on me that if I could figure out what would give me joy in work, that it wouldn't matter, that things would come and that I would eventually be successful no matter what I did.
What are you doing these days that you're fulfilling that joy in the work that you do?
It's interesting. I've built a business over the last, I think we're going on year 14 this year, and started with only two other people and have built a company that has about 120, 130 employees. And these days, what gives me the most joy is we've finally got it to a point where it's all of my work, in fact, is only dealing with the leadership team. And to be able to give them the experiences that I've had and be able to pass it along to them and to be able to create opportunities for them to experience ownership, whether that's equity or mindset of their responsibilities, that's what's been giving me the most joy in the last 2 to 3 years.
And you and I, having connected fairly recently on stage, as a matter of fact, a couple of months ago at a CertaPro Summit, I know that you focusing on your people owning what is their role and their contribution and so forth is really important to you. Can you speak to how do you identify people who are willing to take that level of ownership? Because you can create an environment where people can do that, but it might not be the right person. They may just be a good individual contributor, but not really take that ownership angle. What are the identifying markers that a business owner could look for in an employee who's really going to take that ownership that you look for?
Rich, I wish I had the secret sauce on that one because I think that's the answer. That's the secret everybody's looking for. Where it's worked out for me is the old saying that if you act as if you own the business, someday you will. And so when you see people in their individual contributor roles, owning their worlds, owning the results, and how they say things and how they show up, do things that are not asked of them. One person in particular has continually taken on more responsibility before they were asked. Said, "Hey, I'm ready to take on this person. You mind if I take him on?" They didn't say, "Hey, will you pay me more and I'll take on this person?" And so so when you see that, to me, that's somebody you really want to hone in on and see about creating better opportunities for them in the future.
So I just heard you find people who are doing more than what's asked of them. I know one of the things that we've talked about from time to time is looking for people who do more than what's asked and do it at an excellent level. Is that some people just do what's asked at an excellent level, and some people do more than what's asked, but it's at an average level. And it's that pair of doing more than what's asked at an excellent level. Do you also find that that excellent level is necessary, or do you go, not necessarily? If somebody's just stretching the boundaries and the scope of their role and self-assigning, filling some gaps, that's enough.
I think it's going to depend on the role that they may be playing in the organization. If it's and the role doesn't need it's somebody who's repeating the same thing over and over again, but taking on other areas that they can do that, I think that's replicatable. And if it's somebody you're looking to change or to be a leader or to be dynamic and help others through change or continually take on more responsibility in an organization, I think they've got to be able to deliver excellent results. But very subjective words, Rich. Excellent and average. It's going to depend on the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. And Caleb, I love the way when you talked about the 120, 130 employees and you said, look, as the head coach, I'm focused on now helping others within the organization have maybe different words, but you said something along the lines of real ownership and or mindset ownership. And I'd never really heard of mindset ownership. I love it. I've heard a lot of other words before. I like to say building a culture of entrepreneurship where they're entrepreneurs working in the business. And I love the quote you said. I just want to repeat it again because I thought it was awesome. If you act like you own the business, you may someday will. I think that's a fantastic way of putting it. Can you talk to, for the audience who don't really know you that well, exactly what is the business? Because you talked about what you do, that you have joy. What exactly is the business and how long you've been doing it and what exactly do you guys do?
We do catastrophe cleanup for commercial and residential properties. So whether it's a fire, water, mold situation, if there's a broken pipe in a building, a burst pipe due to freezing, if sprinkler heads break, if cars hit buildings, if the worst case scenario happens in a factory and a boiler blows up and fire takes out half the factory, we go in and bring them back to normal, whatever that is for them or however long that takes to get them back up and running. That's the best way, general way I could describe it.
Yeah, another way to put it is the Ghostbuster theme, like who are you going to call? It's something catastrophe happened. Who are you going to call to come help you in that particular situation? And how long have you been running that business?
It's been 14 years, so started in 2010.
Okay.
So in the Minneapolis, St. Paul market, also own the Duluth franchise and looking to expand in further satellite areas this year.
Okay, awesome. So we talked a little bit about your concept on employee mindset ownership. I think that's a huge theme we talk about a lot in this. But as you look at now, 14 years in a career working with entrepreneurs and being an entrepreneur yourself, and then 14 years now with this particular business and growing a business and building a big team, beyond the ownership mindset piece, what are a couple other big rock learnings you've had that entrepreneurs listening to this could grab onto in terms of they want to grow a business that's going to be successful and thrive? Here's some other key learnings that I've learned that are really important.
I think when you're building and scaling a business, depending on what that business is, particularly for my experience, it's been a service industry business where we're really selling a lot of what I would call the man hour or the labor unit. And it's heavy intensive on people and layers of management. And I think to grow that, you need to treat, I don't actually like the term human capital, because I think people are much more than just a neutral entity like a dollar.
Hmm.
But to get the best performance from people and to create scale, what I've always thought about is as you hire people, it's almost as if you're reinvesting back into the business or doubling down as if you started the business, because it's going to cost you a lot of money and it's a gamble. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs really, or self employed folks that may have felt they're entrepreneurial, where they hit a wall to scale, is taking that additional risk to hire more people and really the ability to replicate themselves. Because there's usually a unit within that business that if replicate, that's where the scalability is. And I think that investment piece, that if people want to scale a smaller business to go to a medium sized or larger business, let's say a $5 million business to a 10, 15, 20, $100 million business, it's all going to be about being able to replicate those layers of responsibility. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle with. And for me, part of that is getting the right people in the right seat, getting in touch with what people's natural gifts and talents are, and being able to create a path for those people early, but also deliver on that path. So the company has to continue to grow to provide those opportunities that then self feed back into the business to help it to continue to grow,
Okay.
in my experience.
Yeah. Okay. And that's great. And if I probe a little bit deeper in that, we all learned the same interviewing style back 25 years ago. And I want to probe a little bit deeper into this to really get to some roots and some keys and some nuggets. You know, each hire is an investment in the business, and the ability to replicate layers is how you're going to scale. I got that. Right people in the right seat. I'm not suggesting you have this form, so I'm putting you on the spot. But if there was a 3-step boom boom or a 5-step, I'm sure it starts with the interviewing process as an example, or the recruiting process, or and then it goes through training. I'm sure you have this formula. You may not have formalized, maybe you have formalized. What would be the steps you'd say, entrepreneurs, look, here it is. If you want to be able to make these investments work when you hire someone in your business, here's the steps you should follow, even if it's more general. What are those steps specifically that you've implemented that work for you?
It's going to sound familiar to a bunch of folks, but it's a performance management cycle. Basically, first recruiting and attracting top talent and doing your best to recruit the right person into the right seat. We use personality assessments. There's many tools out there. In particular, we've used many tools and found that one called Culture Index serves us best. And then from there, it's about making sure that they are at least given the tools to start their job and can have resources to then get up to performance as fast as possible, thinking about it as if it's a car or horse racing. And then once they're up and running, the process of continually calibrating that, and we use coaching for that. It's about how do they increase performance, and then feedback loops and cycles on a quarterly, annual basis, but especially new, looking at 30 days, 60 days, 180 days, course correcting, and always realizing if you've got the right person who fits your vision and values of the organization and they're in the wrong seat, if you have another seat that's better for them, you'd rather keep that person than to discard the person when their performance is low. They might just be in a role that's not their best gifts and talents. So we use that whole cycle and then recalibrate it every year. We have a lot of systemization in our performance meetings. We have an acronym called IDP, Individual Development Program, that gets in touch with their path. Yeah, we're super proud. One of the best stats last year is I think we had, out of 120 employees, we had about 35 promotions.
Hmm.
And so that's a pretty cool stat. And our retention is higher than it's ever been in an industry that really is not a very sexy industry. And we attribute that to just to these development plans and some of our processes.
So when you talked about the quarterly feedback, 30, 60, 90 days, especially with somebody who's newer in the business, you then moved to saying if their performance is not meeting expectations, if they're a culture fit, we tend to stick with them. I want to connect that dot with what you talked about on the recruiting side of the culture index assessment. I've never used that. John, have you used the culture index assessment?
No.
Can you familiarize us with what does that tell you that is a leading indicator for you of that they are one of those culture fits? That if their performance does lag, I had an early indicator they were a culture fit because they did this assessment. What is this assessment about?
The assessment is really the fastest, most practical assessment we've used. In fact, we don't even have a phone call with anybody until they've taken it. It's the very first entry into our recruiting process because we've been able to dial in these parameters to fit the positions that we're actually posting and recruiting for. So when we're posting for, let's say, a project manager, we already know the profile we're looking for. And there's, call it 6 categories, and I won't deep dive it, but one as an example is autonomy. They either have a higher level of autonomy or a lower level of autonomy. Lower level of autonomy, one is not better than the other. A lower level autonomous person really likes high direction and wants to do the same thing usually over and over again. And there's many roles that need that. A high autonomous person has it figured out before they've even been told what to do. Salespeople, as an example, they're highly autonomous people. So we'd be looking for that in a salesperson. We wouldn't be looking for that in a project manager, as an example. So there's one for autonomy, social, patience, and sense of urgency. Those are 2 strengths on opposite perspectives. And then rigidity to process. And so you can build these based off the position, and it's not perfect science. It doesn't show you work ethic. It doesn't show you values, and it doesn't show you integrity. It's not a perfect science, but it's really, we're to the point where there's certain, we won't even talk to somebody if they don't fit the profile.
Gosh, have you found any assessment that will assess values? And you went to work ethic and integrity. I know one of them that I would love to find an assessment for is one that assesses introspection. Is there any assessment that you found that gets even close to values and introspection?
Nope. Besides good old fashioned behavioral interviewing where we ask the right questions to test that. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's time consuming. That's old school. We learned that 25 years ago.
It's well worth the investment every single time.
Speaking of what we learned 25 years ago, what are 1 or 2 things, if you think back in the day when the 3 of us were 25 years ago at our employer at College Pro, what is it that are 1 or 2 things that you might assume John and you and I have in common that you have kept as something core to how you operate in business today?
One is that we take a long time to hire people. Depending on the position, would depend on how long it takes. In some of the higher level positions, there's a kind of a running joke of, oh, my interview process was 6 months. My interview process was 4 weeks. So we still would rather hire slow and fire fast. And when the market changed, we had to adapt to how fast could we hire and still hire slow. So that's one principle that I would definitely still subscribe to. The second is just the good old fashioned ability. And we took this for granted. Back then, I thought every business ran the way College Pro did. And I was shocked when they didn't. And I wish the 3 of us would have got together and created a package that was an entrepreneurial operating system. We could have went to market and made millions. You see the pun there?
Yes.
It blew my mind that companies don't follow many of the principles. But the second one would be just taking big goals and breaking them down into parts and consistently returning that on a quarterly, annual, 5-year, 10-year basis. And the third one would just be what I talked about earlier, really just the performance management piece, that how do you really tap into the human dynamic and really get the most out of people, not for your benefit, but for our benefit combined as partners in whatever working relationship that is.
So 3 things I heard there. One is you're not afraid to have a long hiring process. The other one is taking big goals, breaking them into parts, reviewing at least quarterly the progress on those parts towards the big goal, and then the performance management. Quick question on this long time to hire, because I know we have at CertaPro very similarly. We have it's a lengthy hiring process, and one of the things that we have concern about from time to time is good candidates leaving that long hiring process because it's so long, and somebody else is making a good offer in between our long hiring process. What are your thoughts on that?
Close. What we've learned is if you have somebody that you think can fit that mold, is to close the deal fast. And as you're closing the deal and setting the expectations and layering those on, as you obviously, I don't know if a lot of people think the way I do, but they have to want to work for you first. So selling is critical to good recruiting. But assuming you've sold them on the position, and it's not a bad term, it means that you've matched what they're looking for in a job with what you have to offer. That's sales. It's serving people. And assuming you've done that, I don't see anything wrong with being able to close the deal fast. And then you can say, hey, welcome. You're now starting your working interview. You get 30, 60, 90 days. Yeah, we're going to hire you fast. But if they're the right fit for your performance management culture, they should already know that nothing is guaranteed. So the right person thrives in that. And there would be a hire fast, fire fast solution in that scenario.
Mm.
But I would take the risk. I'd bring them on and just set those expectations. That, hey, we're gonna monitor this closely at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and make sure it's a fit.
So you answered that in two directions, which I appreciate. One direction was they have to want to work with you, which I think you're implying a really good candidate who wants to work with you. You don't need to be afraid of a long hiring process. And then the other direction you went was from time to time, you do hire quickly and you break your own rule. But the rule is it's okay to take a long time. Occasionally, you'll break that rule if you see somebody who you think is a snap fit and you have concern that maybe you have competition with other companies for whatever reason, they're on a timeline. You're not afraid to hire fast from time to time, but you'll keep that fire somebody fast if you find out they're an absolutely not fit after you've made a mistake.
Yeah, and I think it's going to change when the job market changes. I'm still holding out hope that the job market's going to change.
I think the other thing too, though, Rich, that Caleb said, I think is really important. I think very few entrepreneurs use this strategy, or hiring personnel use this strategy, which is, look, we're hiring you because we believe you're a good fit for this business, but now your working interview starts. I don't think that's a term that's used too often, which is, now that you're here, just know that over the next 30, 60, 90 days, like, now you're in the working aspect of your interview, which will formalize whether or not this is a good fit for us long term. And I love that approach, which is they're still on the clock, if you will. And although they're getting paid for it, they still got to earn their stripes. I love that. Just those words.
Caleb, is that an official term you use in your business, is working interview, or is that just a description of something that you came up with in our conversation? Or would people in your business know the term working interview?
Yes. And we depends on the candidate whether or not we're using that expectation, that setting. And I think the reality is nobody's joining us assuming that they're going to work for us forever. So if you're a candidate and you join a company, you don't join that company and say to yourself, oh, I'm in now. I'm going to be here for the next 20 years. I passed the test. They hired me. Why would we think the same as employers? Somebody recruiting somebody, why would we assume, okay, we hired them, they're here forever? Like, we know that's not the case, and it's our job collectively with the candidate to create that long-term opportunity. As the cliches used over and over again in working with people as leaders, but I agree, it's an easy one to understand. It's really like any other long-term relationship you have, whether that is with a best friend or with a significant other. It takes work, and how do you anticipate what could go well and what couldn't go well in order to make that a long-term relationship? And we speak in those terms. We really do. We talk about mutually beneficial relationships. We talk about in the interview, what would go wrong for you not to be here in 5 years? How would that look if you weren't here in a year? What would it look like for you to stay here 10 years? What would you need? What would we need? Because ultimately, I don't think it's a lot of fun for that many people to change jobs every 2 years. To me, it's crazy that people would actually desire job hopping because, and maybe to get higher salaries, but I can't imagine how awkward that is. Every single new job, every year or two, you're acclimating to the new culture. You don't even know your role yet, and it's just over and over again. So anyway, maybe I'm old school, but that's the way I look at the world.
Yeah. I asked the one end of what's something from 25 years ago we all may have in common. I said long time to hire, big goals in the parts, and performance management. I'm going to go on the other end. Outside of the culture index, what are one or two things that you might assume John and I don't have experience with that you've learned over the 25 years that we have not been working together that you go, you know what, guys, I think I'm actually really on to something with this, and you may want to be aware.
I don't know if that's the case, guys. I tend to replicate and take things to another level. I don't really ever claim to have an original idea. But that's a tough question, Rich.
Maybe consider, what have you done with your business? I know, again, from us having communicated a few months ago on stage, you told a story of the growth of your business. So maybe think about how you've grown your business exponentially in employees, in volume over the last 14 years. What are some principles you applied or that you learned that you wouldn't have known 25 years ago?
I think here's one that does come to mind. We used to have the saying, sell for book for show, produce for dough. If you guys remember that one. In our line of work, and I think every business as it scales, some philosophies are still sell it, we'll figure it out. Sell it, we'll figure it out. And what I've seen is that it's really interesting that doesn't always work. And to grow consistently over time, there's a balancing act, and I don't have it perfectly figured out. Is when do you invest in the people to get ready for the growth? And what I have found though is that if you build it, they will come. And it puts some pressure on everybody. But again, that taking that risk to say, okay, we want to grow next year or 2 years from now. What do we got to bring on the team and infrastructure we have to build in advance of that growth to get ready for that growth so it's sustainable growth? And what is that investment? Because profits are going to go down. That's probably something that I wouldn't have learned 25 years ago that I definitely have learned in the last 10 years.
So is that summarized as planning and investing for sustainable growth? And if yes, I can see that, because our business 25 years ago, it was repetitive annual cycles, really. And it wasn't a sustainable growth per franchise unit per se. Is that it? Is planning and investing for sustainable growth is a skill that you now possess that you wouldn't have had 25 years ago? Did I capture the essence of what you were saying there?
Yeah, and I would also say that it didn't happen. It probably really happened through a lot of pain over the last 14 years of really average about 40% growth a year. And those years where we did 100% growth, 200% growth were really hard to get through. I think so. So lessons came through a lot of pain, as does most lessons in life.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what I would say. Rich asked a trick question, which is, what is something you learned that you don't think we've learned in the process? But what I find interesting is we all kind of learn.
Wait a minute. Was that a trick question?
Trick question, because he doesn't know what we learned. So to ask him what he's learned that we didn't learn, he doesn't know what we haven't learned. It's a little bit of a trick question. But there is one thing that I think is very compelling that you learned on your journey that we didn't know 25 years ago, that we all learned independent of each other, which is get joy in what you're doing in life without even getting paid, whatever you're doing, right? Have joy in what you're doing, because that ultimately is going to drive your happiness in life and in other aspects outside of work and every other area, if you're really enjoying what you're doing. And I think, if I understand it correctly, I don't want to speak for all three of us, we're doing something today that we love doing. If we weren't getting paid, we'd still be doing what we're doing because this is what we love. We're in that lane. And too many times entrepreneurs find themselves in this messy middle of growing a business. And they're like, this isn't fun anymore, or their careers. And this isn't where I want to be. And that was a big aha moment for me too, Caleb, was waking up one day and going, what am I doing? I don't even have a life plan for myself. What am I trying to achieve here in this grand thing of life? So I think that's something we've all independently found on our own journey that is probably the most important aspect, almost exactly where we started.
I've just had the pleasure of hanging out with Another entrepreneur randomly met him through my girlfriend and spent New Year's with him. And self-starter from Utah, built a manufacturing business, and he would say the same thing, that it's a different kind of lifestyle, but if you connect those two, I would venture to say that most successful people have found that. And I guess success is a vague word. I would say most scalable businesses and people who've created legitimate wealth for themselves and net worths in the 20 to 50 to 100 to 200 million dollar range, which is still considered medium sized business, which is oddly enough, have found that to be the case. And they still would do it without getting paid. And they still are doing it without getting paid. A lot of my mentors, they're not getting paid, and they're still carrying the torch and passing it on to guys like me, which I feel then it's my responsibility to do likewise.
Yeah. I love that. It brings us all the way back full circle to where we started the conversation. And Rich appropriately called out the head coach title that you have, and the fact that everything we've talked about in this conversation was about you being a head coach and you being a mentor to others and bringing the right people into your organization so that you can, grow the organization, not only for yourself, but for the people in your business, for them to grow more equity, whether it be real equity or ownership, mindset equity, or whatever it may be. So love the stories that you shared, and really the message to entrepreneurs here, which is get the right people in your business and help them prosper and grow, and so too shall you. So Caleb, fantastic conversation. Loved reconnecting. It's been way too long. Hopefully it won't be so long for the next time.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Thanks, Caleb.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, guys. Take care.
Stay tuned as John and Rich unpack today's conversation.
John, one of the concepts that Caleb talked about, but it was only for a moment, and I think it's often not used enough in the interview process, is selling. Many times as an interviewer, we get so wrapped up in the fact that we are doing the selecting that we miss and forget that our candidate is doing selecting just as well as we are. And some of those selling questions, it was interesting because Caleb then elaborated a little bit later in the conversation and said something like, one of the questions he asked people is, what would you need to be here in 10 years? And I was like, oh, that's a selling question. Like, those are the types of things he does to help induce a candidate to envision themselves being at the company, which allows them to have that nice long interview process to get to know the person and ensure it's a fit. So I just want to double down on that. Selling questions in the interview process are really about asking questions in the interview that the candidate needs to answer envisioning being at your company.
Yeah.
And way too little of that is done. And I think we lose a lot of candidates, just generally, any interviewer loses a lot of candidates as a miss of including selling as a component of that interview.
Yeah, Rich, entrepreneurs always talk about the investment they're making in an employee coming to work for them and what their ROI will be or not be based on this employee's performance or non-performance. But when do we flip the switch and think about what is the employee's investment in coming to work for our company, and what's their return on investment for coming to work in our company, and what do they aspire to create as a return on investment for coming to our company, so that as a mentor or a head coach in Caleb's position, how can we help them achieve such goals and know right off the bat what they aspire to do in their life or their careers, so we can immediately start understanding them as an individual versus a human capital asset they're bringing onto their company to create an investment return for themselves, the entrepreneur. So flipping that switch, I think, is really important. And having that head coach mentor mindset is something that I fear a lot of entrepreneurs lack. And so you have this investment. You hire one employee, lose one out the back door, hire two, lose another one. And you're always chasing it. And the cost of training, the cost of the knowledge and investment you're making in these people just gets lost, because you get lost in really what they aspire to create by being a part of your business. So I think you bring up a good point. It's part selling, but it's also part connecting the needs and the wants of both parties together. As you said, selling sounds like a bad term sometimes. But when you're selling something, it's because you have something and they have something, and you connect them together and it's a match. How can you do that in the interviewing process to really connect those dots?
Well, and his retention of people We didn't specifically hear his retention, but what he did say is 35
We
people out
did
of
actually. He said
120 got
85%.
promotions.
He said 85%.
Oh, I missed that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really good. So he turned over 15% and he promoted around 30%. Those are interesting numbers. I'd love to have him back on and ask him if those are the standard year over year. And I'm sure, knowing him, those promotions are not gratuitous as a retention play. Those promotions were earned. And I'm sure that there are metrics that need to be hit in order to get those promotions. So those are impressive numbers. And I missed the 85%. Thanks for
Yeah, he
that.
actually said that's one of the better numbers they've had in a while. And for the industry they're in, it's well above industry numbers. So it's something that he was really proud of. And we talked about a little bit about the on the backside of the conversation when we were done recording with Caleb. But I think he's creating a culture within his business where people want to work for those mentors and head coaches and aspire to create something. And just that aspiration of being there, being treated well, having an IDP, a development plan, individual development plan, where you know and you're aligned with where you're going. What ends up happening too often is if you hire someone, you just throw them out there, 3 years go by, there's really no communication. You don't know what's happening. I think creating that ongoing IDP process with employees is something he talked about. We didn't dive into enough. But the coaching, the feedback loops, giving them the tools and resources, the cultural index that he does for the personality test, all these things are just to try and align the right person within your business. Because if you get the right people and you treat them right and you follow their development plan, the part that we didn't dive into enough as well is what if they're not performing where they are, maybe they're just not in the right seat because they seem to be the right person, help them find the right seat. And I've had varying degrees of success with that personally in my life. Sometimes when they're not a good fit in this seat, they're also not a good fit in this seat. And you can be careful there. You got to be really cautious. But under that hire, slow, fire, fast component, giving them that working interview to be like, okay, let's go. We're hiring you, and using, it was a very good question you asked. Do you actually use those terms? I love the fact that he does, because it puts that person, hey, look, welcome to the team, but now proof is in the pudding. Let's go. Let's make sure that this is a good fit for both of us, because keeping you here any longer won't do you any justice either. But now you're in the working interview stage of this part, right? Go prove yourself. I love that. And I've actually had a lot of success, Rich, in my career where we hire in twos or threes. And we actually, not that it's a competition, we have room for all three of you guys. You're now in the working interview stage of this piece. We just hired all three of you at the same time. You all have the same tools and resources. And there's some inherent, I want to prove that I'm a better fit here competition that I've had a lot of success with as well.
And like you, I had never heard of the term working interview, and I like the concept. I want to dial back to where you started there, was around people wanting a head coach, people wanting to join an environment where they can be coached. John, I cannot emphasize more the people who we want. And when I say we, I say as entrepreneurs. The people who we want in our organizations are people who want to be developed, people who want to be invested in, not the people who say, just give me my job and leave me alone. I have a way to do it. I deliver results. I'm going to do it my way. Those aren't the people we want, even though they may deliver results. The people who we want are the people who want to be poured into, that are both skilled and green and growing at the same time. It's a term that I've mentioned to you before, John, on confident humility is all about, I'm very clear that I have strengths and what they are. And I'm equally clear that there's always more to learn. And I'm equally clear that there are things I'm not so good at. And I can speak to both with the same level of comfort. I can comfortably speak about my strengths and it not be bragging. It's just what it is. And I can comfortably speak about my weaknesses and it not be shameful, just what it is. And here's where I am focused on learning next. So I just want to come back to that and just elaborate on what you had said with the people want a head coach. I agree. And I think those are the people who we want. The people who want to be developed.
Yeah, let me challenge that for a second, but in a confident and humility kind of context. There are entrepreneurs that if they were confident and had humility, they would say, I'm actually more of a manager than I am a mentor. I haven't necessarily sharpened my saw to develop those mentorship skill sets. If we're really being real with each other, not every entrepreneur has a mentorship style. And in that scenario, hiring people who are looking for a mentor or looking for a head coach may not be the right fit. That entrepreneur may need to hire somebody who just can take this division and go run it and be, independent and go make it happen. But it further illustrates the fact that if today's working class and generation is looking for mentorship and head coach, and you as an entrepreneur are not developing your skill sets to move from a manager to a leader to a mentor, like Ted Ma would talk to us about when he was on, if you don't develop and sharpen your own skill sets as an entrepreneur, and hopefully people that are listening to this are those who want to sharpen their skill sets. That's why they're listening to podcasts like these. You have to keep moving like Caleb has and develop your skill sets to be a head coach, to be a mentor, because that will attract the people that really are hungry for success and maybe with your company long-term because they've found the right head coach. They've found the right mentor.
I'm going to take your challenge and kind of pivot and challenge back a touch. That I've got an example of a franchise owner in the peer-to-peer group that I facilitate who we had a conversation just 2 months ago in the group about he is an excellent manager and he was not practicing leadership skills, and just from how he works, he's a better manager than he is a leader. And where we went with that was people still need to be developed in a way that a leader can develop them, a mentor can develop them. And it's okay if it's not you, find someone to refer to. So I'm going to double down on, John, even if you are an entrepreneur who's a better manager of systems and you are a leader of people, and your temptation is just to hire somebody, plug them in and forget it because they'll perform, I'm still going to say that's not the person we want. I think even as a manager, we want people who want to grow and develop. And it's okay to acknowledge that maybe I'm not the person to help grow and develop you, but I'm going to find somebody. I'm going to invest in you instead of with my time and my skill. I'm going to pay as a company for you to get the correct skill because you are hungry and want to perform better in your role here. So it's okay. Not all leadership needs to come from the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur has to practice confident humility and say, I'm not the one to grow you there, but I'm going to find someone who is.
Okay, let's meet in the middle. If you're an entrepreneur who has not yet developed your leadership and or mentorship skills, but desire to, let's go. There's podcasts. You can have a mentor coach yourself. You can come to the Entrepreneurs United Empowerment Experience and surround yourself with mentors and people that are doing it today, or learn from people like Caleb and have them help you. There's a way to sharpen your saw and get there, but have that confident humility to know whether you're there or you're not. And really that can be done through a 360 assessment. That can be done through just really asking some questions of your team and where you're at. Because a lot of people think they're mentors, but they're really not. So that's a whole different limb. But if you don't have the desire to develop those skill sets and continue to sharpen your saw then you absolutely must invest in somebody on your team who's going to take on that role for you so you can just continue to do what you excel at, which is perfectly fine. So I'll meet you there, which is if you don't want to develop that skill set, you don't want to sharpen your saw, that's perfectly fine.
Agreed.
But know who you are.
Same page.
Love it. Well, this is a great conversation. It was great to reconnect again with Caleb for sure. And this is one of the best parts I think about these conversations, Rich, is just reconnecting with people and checking out. Because even though we came from the same school of thought, train of thought, cut from the same cloth, whatever you want to say, I learned a few things from these conversations. I'm like, oh yeah, we got to be doing this in our company. Hopefully you gained a lot from it. Our listeners gained a lot from it. And we need more guests like Caleb.
Cool.